Today's guest, Leslie Kivit, again, episode 2, we talked about social engineering.
Look, right, I after this experience, I also dove in a couple of numbers, which are maybe interesting also to mention. So basically, according to Forbes, so in the first quarter of 2022, more than 40 million people were actually exposed to scams. And the Federal Trade Commission, so the FTC, in the United States, basically said that job seekers lost around $68 million, basically due to fake business and also job opportunities. So it's a huge number. Obviously, this is data from 2022. But knowing, right, I think that with the rise of OpenAI and other AI tooling, right, it makes it easier, I think, to produce text or produce videos. I can only imagine, right, that this amount has probably increased.
We talked about social engineering, the negative side on how he got frauded through job interviews and job interviewing as an advisory board member. And then also we talked about the positive things of social engineering, where you can create value in sourcing, scoping a role, evaluation, closing candidates, and just gathering relevant information where it's maybe hard when you not use social engineering tactics.
Then you can build trust, and then you can spend less time communicating and more time just getting shit done.
Then I went home and thought about this sentence.
We basically put it on the table.
Hiring takes time. People are trained.
How to objectively judge certain situations.
It's very, 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 very hard to change things.
That was the learning.
Entrepreneurs with empathy.
To the people side.
Good morning, Leslie, again. We already did an episode on freelancing tips and so on. And there is also an introduction about yourself, so we don't need to do that again. So people who are just listening to this episode and want to know Leslie, please listen to the previous episode with him. Today we are talking about social engineering and talent acquisition. And Leslie, you told me that you had also some stories on from both sides, right? Where it was positive and negative. So maybe we can start with a bit of story time.
Yeah, so I think this is actually a pretty cool topic, and I think it's also a topic that is, more increasing. Right, also today, or I guess also yesterday, right, was the launch of Sona, right, the new OpenAI, tool, right, which allows you, to create actually video from text within 1 minute. And if you see like all these videos that actually have come out now, it's truly amazing. So I think it has a lot of positives, I think, but we also need to, consider what what other side effects could actually be. So, yeah, I have a pretty also personal story actually around, the topic of social engineering. Every now and then I also help projects basically with, with building up the company. And I remember that at one point I got an outreach via Twitter, which basically said like, hey, look, we're a gaming company. We looked at your profile and we would actually like to invite you for, an advisory role. I've been worked in Web3 and crypto, for some time. I'm, pretty careful usually with sharing my information, but this looks, legit. So I would do what anyone, would do. I, tried to discover a little bit more about the company, did like a very nice website. There was a team basically presented, their roles were basically, presented. And I thought, okay, let's just, jump on the interview. So I actually did the interview. The person liked basically what they said. And he said like, look, like the next step for you would be to meet the team. But yeah, obviously it's also important that you understand the game, right, that we're actually, are building. And you can probably already feel what happened next. So I went to the website basically to download the game. And within probably 4 days, the crypto that I held actually personally was gone. Actually on my wallet, on my PC. I had to wipe my PC. And look, it sounds so stupid. It sounds so silly. There are a lot of, red flags, I think, sort of along the way that I spotted, right? But there's like optimism, right, that you have. There's excitement also that you have, right, when somebody reaches out to you. And, despite all the, I don't know, like all the commercials or all the warnings. Maybe that's even, getting, internally, it's still pretty exciting, to also click these, these links. And especially if you spoke to several members of a team, this is usually how you slim down, the chances of potential scam.
And this happened that
And
you got a reach out message through LinkedIn, and then
yeah.
it was more like, was it a chat conversation, or was it also video calls or phone calls?
Yeah, no. So it was actually a conversation that started over Twitter, indeed, this person also referred. This person had a LinkedIn, profile, we had a video call. I literally saw the person, and then I also met a second person, and it made total sense to me, right? If you're gonna work for like a gaming company, or you're gonna do advisory for a gaming company, I think it's only logical, right, that you understand what the product is and basically what they do. And if you have to install like a launcher, right, that felt normal to me. But yeah, the moment when I basically launched also the game, there was like this, this error message, right? We didn't allow me to play the game, and that was the moment when I felt like, maybe there's something fishy going on, right? But and that's probably the moment where I should have maybe reformatted my entire computer, but my virus scanner didn't notice anything, so I was absolutely caught off guard. And I was also telling you before we moved into this conversation that every time that my laptop is taking a little bit longer than it used to be, I automatically get nervous. So yeah.
I think I just in parallel want to read out something from Google. There is also a definition for social engineering in terms of security context, right? And I think this is actually what happened to you. So in the context of information security, social engineering is the psychological manipulation of people into performing actions or divulging confidential information. So that's, I think, the forum where we should be careful and where it should not be used. But I think in a more positive way, there are so many use cases of just a type of social engineering where it can add value to anyone, right? We can call it maybe relevant social engineering or value creating social engineering.
Yeah, absolutely. But look, right, I after this experience, I also dove in a couple of numbers which are maybe interesting also to mention.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, according to Forbes, so in the first quarter of 2022, more than 40 million people were actually exposed to scams. And the Federal Trade Commission, so the FTC, in the United States, basically said that job seekers lost around $68 million basically due to fake business and also job opportunities. So it's a huge number. Obviously, this is data from 2022. But knowing, right, I think that with the rise of OpenAI and other AI tooling, right, it makes it easier, I think, to produce text or produce videos. I can only imagine, right, that this amount has probably increased. So yeah, I think I think like my tip, right, I think to anyone, at least from a sort of applying perspective, right, uphold your standards, right. If it's if salaries are too high, it's often too good to be true. And you need to do your due diligence. And I think we are very good, or I think we're better as companies equipped, right, to filter out candidates, right, that have also male intent. I've also seen those while I was hiring for the companies that I worked for. But I think when you are applying for roles or when you see opportunities, right, there's this optimism, right, of you hoping to find that next exciting career challenge, and sometimes you get a bit blinded perhaps by the things that are going on.
Definitely. And I think there is also some checklist what everybody can ask as a job seeker, that also just researching the company maybe on LinkedIn, because I think any company kind of has something on LinkedIn or on social media or somewhere, but where you can research. And if that doesn't make any sense, then be very skeptical and really ask a lot of questions. And I think by asking a lot of questions and not getting solid answers, then you should later see, okay, either it's not a confident where I then feel confident working for, or maybe it's even some kind of scam.
Absolutely.
In case you like my show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's move to the positive side. What did you find? Like, what did you figure out?
So I think there are several positive examples. For instance, I would say A/B testing job ads could also be a sort of social engineering, right? Where I see a lot of companies, they don't know what the next level of leadership hire could look like. And then instead of just posting one job ad or describing one job, you go out with three. You say, okay, you have three different variations of one job and maybe two different seniority levels. So you have 6 job ads live, but actually just one job to hire. I don't think that this is a bad thing to do. I think it's A/B testing. Yeah. And I think it should be done. And it gives you way more flexibility in the calibration. I think it's just important that you are very transparent that you're doing that and how you're doing it, right? And then I think it's not a problem at all. And the second piece is also for sourcing sometimes in very niche roles. For instance, let's take software engineering. If you want to source on GitHub, and as a recruiter, you don't have really high chances to get maybe responses through committing to another repository of an engineer where you know, okay, we want to hire for a very, very, very niche skill. And on GitHub, you find certain repositories of this very niche skill. You might not send out a LinkedIn message or scrape the email and then send out a cold email, which is also then a question in some countries. It's not even allowed, right? If you should do that and if it's well received. But what if you can go to your engineering manager or to one of the top engineers in your company and say, can you just start committing to the repository of this engineer and then start a conversation with him? Of course, with the mindset that at some point we want to hire him. But first building a relationship on purpose in the environment they feel comfortable. I don't think that this is a bad thing, to be honest. But it's also a sort of social engineering, right?
Yeah. No, I agree. I think social engineering, at least for me personally, I think what it also means is that you know, if we talk about like the positive side, right, of the topic, I think it's a way of creating channels, right, that would basically allow you to communicate with the audience, right, that you would like to interact with, and because you don't always know your audience, I think from the get-go, right, you need to basically, like you said, you need to A/B test, I think, to sort of try to figure out what actually works, and that I think accounts for the candidates that you are trying to hire, and that you try to trigger, right, and at the same time it could also count for your for your employees, because not everybody receives the information in the same way. You have folks that would like to read it, you have folks that like to see a video, you have folks indeed that would like to see, for example, work actually being contributed to their own work, right? So I think there are different pieces of the puzzle. I think that's a really, really interesting actually approach to convincing also your candidate, right, that you are the right employer, right, because you speak the same language as they do, or maybe you even speak a better language than they actually realize, right? So I think that's a really, really good take, actually.
And do you also have some use cases where you saw this in a positive way, social engineering being used in a positive way for value creation?
Yeah, I mean, I think the most recent example is that right. So at the previous company that I worked for, it's basically a Bitcoin bank. It's a crypto bank. It means that the audience, right, that's usually working for companies, or at least a proportion of, and specifically engineers, is not likely, to be on LinkedIn, but they're more likely on, for example, Twitter, or they are more likely to be on Telegram, right? So, which basically meant for us that we needed to sort of, adapt the language that we, would speak, I think, also with those folks, and to find them also on sources where they would usually not be on. And it's not only to find them on those sources, but how to communicate them, or how to communicate with them on those sources, right? Because most of them are not doxed, which basically means that their identity is not known, and sometimes they also don't want to talk about it. And if they don't want to talk about it, then in the end, they wouldn't be the right fit for us because we are like a regulated bank. You need to understand what space is basically behind, the computer. But for that specific industry, what usually doesn't matter is this impact, this output, and not sincerely the person who is actually doing it, right? So, that led us in really understanding, for example, on what language we would need to speak on a Discord, right? So we started to create actually our own community on Discord, so we could actually speak the language of that particular audience, because they would be on Discord, chatting about some project or contributing to some project rather than being on actually on LinkedIn. Right. So I think that's one example where we started to change our approach, our outreach approach, and our language. Right. So suddenly within the recruiting team, you have a community manager, right? So somebody that try to keep the conversation going, try to put in also topics that we find relevant as a company at that point for specific roles that we would be recruiting for. Another thing is that it was a much stronger focus on creating a newsletter, for example, that would speak the language of that specific audience with like upcoming roles or with other developments that we deem to be important. Continuously being in a conversation, right, with your audience of what you're sharing is actually something that they like. So I think these are two recent examples.
I also think there's another example in terms in executive hiring, what I saw from an evaluation piece. So you can also use that in the evaluation component. It was an example where a German Mittelstand company was hiring one of their executive team members externally, so not from the family, right? So then it is always even, I think, more critical in terms of how people behave. And they always wanted to invite candidates in final stages to a certain side of the company. But it was not really about a certain side of the company where then they do a workshop or so on. They just made it up because they also co-owned the hotel, and they wanted to ask the staff, the cleaning staff, the reception staff, the restaurant staff, on how this person was dealing with them and if they could imagine working for them.
Yeah.
And of course, also they then invited the whole family, that they really have the real life experience. And that's also a way of making use of social engineering principles. And I also don't think that this is something really bad. Yeah. The question is also, is it doing the job what you want to get out of it, right? So I think you need to be very careful in also judging and not going and not going too far in terms of personal boundaries as well. I think that's really, really important. But there are so many use cases for many different examples.
I think that's very cool.
Another one that I also saw is, for instance, back then there was a tool called Follower Wonk. Do you know that tool?
Nope.
It was a Twitter tool. I don't know if it doesn't exist, if it is still existing for X now, but you could just use, for instance, I also use it for software engineering. We wanted to hire the people that were not available on LinkedIn, right? And then we were looking on Twitter, and we were looking on the top 3 connected engineers in a exclusive engineering community, and put them into the tool Follower Wonk. And then you got a Venn diagram with 3 circles, and you saw the proportion of Twitter users who are all following the same person and who they are following as well. And then okay, these are the top 7 people that are all connected to each other. So we need to reach out to them. How do we do it? We just get one to a lunch, not even reaching out saying, hey, I will have a job for you. Do you want to work with us? It doesn't work. No, it's like you need to go a different stage to maybe find something exciting to say, let's make a community event or a hackathon or something, and can we just meet up front on how we could do that, right? And then you have a bigger story, but the overall purpose is just you want access to these people, but there you go a very different route to get there, that they talk to you, right? And that you gather information, and that you then ask, okay, who would be the top 3 people that come to your mind who should also do live coding or should run a team in the hackathon, for instance. Okay, that name was dropped, and suddenly 2 out of the people they dropped were 2 out of the 7 we wanted to target. Right?
Yeah. That's awesome.
But it's of course very, very, very high maintenance and very, very high effort. But I think if something is super critical, for instance, very specific niche roles, but also executives, why not doing something like this, right?
Yeah, because the cost, right, for example, executive search is already, so pretty high. Right. So having like a system, for example, on board, I think that makes a lot of sense. It actually also got me to think, right? Like, I think there are probably already a lot of, practices in social engineering or like, that you already apply. I think specifically if you work in an in-office environment. I remember when I worked at Facebook, I mean, here in Switzerland, right? So they have this thing here, where, you got apero, right, at the end of the day. But we would used to do this with our, candidates as well, right? So instead of showing them to the cleaner or showing them, for example, to the maid, it's the team, right? So we often had our, recruiting coordinator that created like the most awesome, like, cakes or whatever. And then this person would just have a break, right, between like the 3 interview rounds. And then this person would eat a bit of cake, whatnot. And often they were like, deliberately, obviously, there were, team members then also sent to like the Facebook kitchen, right, to basically ask this person what this person is working on. And I think by doing this, right, you leave these little sort of nudges, right, that should create this like, this authentic sort of interest. And I think like another way, right, we probably a lot of people already use is like around, event recruiting. Right, I think event recruiting is another really good way. I think of social engineering, where you are basically hiring by not saying that you're hiring, right? So you talk about a very cool, sort of project what excites people. You create side events, right, that sort of double down on those developments or that topic that you're known for, and then before you know it, there's an opportunity to interview, right? So I think that's another way of how you've seen
Yeah, and I think also what I also saw, but where I think companies need to be very careful, and I think it's even not allowed in some countries, that people are just call other people they know on other people's opinions for references without consent. I don't think that this is something a best practice what I would recommend, but I saw it happening, and I also saw the value for the person calling, because you get a very I would say, not maybe unbiased, but unsold view of a candidate, because of course if a candidate is giving you a name of 6 references, the level where this happened was like salaries 300,000 euros and plus, right? So understood of the founders that they wanted to really make sure that if they invest that, not just in terms of salary, but also scope and budget behind that and decisions that were made, that they really want to make sure. And I think it's also a bit of question about, okay, I just really want to make the right decision, and therefore I really invest a lot of time in just figuring out what information could I get out there that I maybe don't get from a regular interview process that help me decide for a very critical decision. In case you have any feedback or anything you want to share with me, please send me an email on thomas@peoplewise.com or hit me up on LinkedIn. And in case you really enjoy the show, please subscribe. I would really appreciate it.
Social proof is important, right? But I think there's, like you said, I think there's an order also to things. And like I do think indeed that CEOs sometimes have the tendency to ask for these referrals a little bit, sort of too fast, because there's also context often also to those referrals. So yeah, no, I 100% agree. I think like these referrals specific for those roles are really important because social proof matters. But I think it makes more sense, right, if you've also interviewed and have consent, obviously, of the candidate itself, because there might always be reasons why certain adventure didn't end the way, it ended, or was supposed to end. So yeah, no, absolutely agree.
When we're talking about people, who is a person that I don't know, who I should interview as well?
That's a good question. Look, I've been thinking a lot about AI lately. Everybody has, I think, and I've always been excited to learn more about what AI could actually do to make our lives more more easier, so that we can actually focus on things that really really matter. So someone that I would probably recommend you to interview would probably be Paul Carman. Great guy. He's making a huge bet, I think, on AI creation in HR, and I don't think there are a lot of people that have been actually doing that. And so, no, I think he's a great person to talk to, and it could get pretty technical as well, but within the HR side. So that would
What's
be
the name
my
again?
recommendation.
Paul?
Yeah, Paul, and then Paul Carman. Carman.
Do you
Yeah.
know him?
Yeah, I do.
Can you also ask him or make an intro, or should I reach out
Absolutely.
myself? Yeah,
No,
what do
I'll
you
make
think?
the
Because
intro.
I think that always works well. And if he's up for it, I definitely want to have him on the show. Yeah.
I think he's 100% up to it. I think he's also building his social presence a bit, so it would be good for him to to put his nose out. I mean, he won't like it, but he needs to do it. So.
Yeah, sure. So it should be a benefit for anyone, right? For the listener, for me, and for him.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Leslie, I think that was enough content for social engineering. Thank you so much.
I agree. Thank you so much for everything.